I'm from Australia, and I used to work at a 24/7 rural petrol station in a small town called Barham. It's on the Murray River, and if you don't know, there are quite a lot of spooky stories around the river. If you ask any local, they will have a story to tell. Anyway, when I started the job, I was told not to mind the shadows that you may see get picked up on the security cameras. As these cameras were constantly recording, you could watch the cameras on a small TV behind the counter. My boss said that they come and go around the petrol pumps, and sometimes the lights would go out over the pumps. He said to ignore it, and if you want, you can stay in the back room until a customer walks in. When I asked why, what are they? In the most Aussie way possible, he goes, because they aren't customers, they aren't your friends, and fucked shit happens if you acknowledge them. With this, I started my first graveyard shift. Lucky for me, they had put someone else on the shift with me because I was new. But that didn't prepare me for that night. It got to about 2 a.m. in the morning before things started to get weird. Every now and then the fridge lights would flicker, or the radio would go in and out of static. But what was truly unsettling was watching this figure on the cameras going back and forth, just on the edge where the overhead lights for the pump stopped and beyond just being pitch black. Road. The other worker, his name was Tony, could also see it and seemed to try and ignore it. It felt like he was trying to not seem spooked for my sake. Bless you, Tony. What was strange was that when car headlights shone onto the road where the figure was pacing, it just vanished, confirming that it wasn't physical. When the owner of the car finished filling up and came to the counter to pay, I tried my hardest not to look like I'd just seen a ghost. But what the man said to me next just tipped me over that night. He said, "Just had my first experience of a ghost car. I see his tail lights, and then suddenly gone. Creepy shit out in the bush tonight." The understatement of the year. Needless to say, I am not ashamed to admit that I quit that job after 4 days, as I could not bring myself to work another night shift at that place. And still till this day I don't know how anyone could. It was a wild experience. We fast forward a few months later and I had gone to a mate's house for a bonfire on his parents' property. We would call this a gatho. We would burn off garden waste, and sit around the fire having a chat with a few drinks and maybe a joint to share. It was always very chill. It was mid-July, so it was quite a cold night. Now, this is a small town, so it's not uncommon to know everyone, especially teenagers. So it was no surprise to see Tony from the petrol station at the gatho. I knew I had to pick this guy's brain for some context of what happened that night. As soon as I sat down to chat with him, we got to talking. I remember him saying, "You know, you got out of that place at the right time." I asked him why that was. Did something happen? He then said, "One of them managed to speak. I saw the shadow pacing, but then it started to call my name." I remember at this point that poor Tony looked really uncomfortable. And I remember his eyes getting teary when he said it sounded like my mum. She passed away when I was like 12. He struggled so hard to get the next part out. It showed up every night after that using the same voice asking me to come outside. I quit about 2 weeks after you did, because of that. And I still can't get the voice out of my head. It sounded like my mum, but it was way too sinister. When he said that last part, I felt that chill you get in your butt cheeks. The kind that you know what you are being told is legit. Even if this wasn't a paranormal encounter, whatever Tony did hear or see really got him. After that, a few more of us joined in the conversation. We talked about our encounters and other things we saw out in the bush. I now live in Meanjin, Brisbane. City life is completely different, but the paranormal doesn't stop. Ever since that night, I have had a huge interest in the paranormal and started to find tools for skeptical thinking. I learned pretty quickly that most of the time, paranormal activity can definitely be explained. But I do have a few more stories of encounters I have had that I cannot explain to this day. But Barham will forever be the most haunted place I ever lived. I'm convinced that the land is haunted there. I'm going back there in winter, back to the petrol station to see if I can capture this encounter again. I've come to a frightening realization. I'll start this off by saying I grew up completely, 100% adamant that the paranormal isn't real. It can all be rationalized, and that people who believed in it haven't thought about it hard enough. I've made other posts on other subs about paranormal events that have happened in my life recently, that have completely changed my mind, primarily about my neighbor's house. That's not what I'll be talking about today, though. I live in the Midwest. I live on a small, rural lot between a cornfield and a small forest, in a camper. I've lived in this county my entire life. I know the entire county like the back of my hand. This being said, I've come to the conclusion that my experiences around the rural and wooded parts of this county are crawlers. I'm 100% sure of it. I've had many encounters actually, none back to back, but they happen frequently. There is a forest park in the middle of the town I always hated at night since I was little. As I got older, my cousin and I thought getting scared was really fun. We'd go there at night on purpose, but never lasted long. I always felt like I was being watched. This, on top of urban legends of people going missing here at night, made me feel really uneasy. Fast forward to a few years ago, I got married and am settling into life as a husband. I do take my large all-black German Shepherd, Fenrir, on walks with me at night. I always walk towards the park, but I usually don't enter into it. The first time something weird happened was 5 years ago. I was walking Fenrir and the woods to the front and to the right of me, to the left and behind me was a neighborhood edge and a small playground went silent. My dog started acting super anxious. He's usually a very stoic and quiet dog. He's 120 pounds and built like a tank. Looks very intimidating and he knows it. I heard rustling in the woods following me, and I felt like I was being stalked. I ran home and that's the end of the first encounter. I had a few more encounters like that, but last year things really amped up. I was on a walk around 11:30 p.m. with Fenrir, my wife, and our little newer dog, Booger. He's a Terrier Kai mix. We are walking down the same path, and about 3 blocks away from the woods, 4 or so deer are sprinting out of the trees into the street, towards us. And they seem terrified. Then I hear what I can only describe as what sounded like a human trying to mimic the sounds of a monkey. I thought it was silly until recently, when I read that other guy's story who heard the same fucking thing. We laughed it off as some kids playing around. Once we get up to the woods and are walking parallel, we can clearly see two reflective eyes and a silhouette staring us down from the tree line. We also heard a deep growl, and then like a hissing sound. But it wasn't super high-pitched or anything. Both our dogs acknowledged this as well. Finn stared and Booger growled a bit. I made a Facebook post on the community's Facebook group and other people told similar stories. Around town, around this time I got a job as a tour guide / maintenance for Rail Explorers. I am working there again this year as well. We start April 1st, basically. They take unused or tour-specific railroad sections that aren't used federally. And they have these pedal carts with motor assist on them you can use to explore the tracks. It's super cool and super fun. The one I work at is like 5 minutes from where I live, and it goes through the woods in an inaccessible part of the county unless you float down the river and hike up steep, loose dirt hills. You go under one old car bridge, and you go over to multi-100-foot length old train bridges. The first one is larger and taller, and it's about 150 feet off the ground above the forest. The second goes over the river. About 6 months into the job and it's fall. We work until midnight sometimes with the last tour leaving around 9 p.m. That means the last tour for the last 2 months of the year are in complete darkness. The way that job operates is with 6 employees. For get on the lead bike, and to get on the rear bike, from the lead bike, we drop off one person at the busy intersection so they can flag traffic, and one person gets dropped off at the large train bridge that goes over the woods. The person at the bridge gives a short safety speech to the customers, who stop and go one at a time. Over the bridge, the employee carts are much faster than the customer ones. We all have walkie-talkies. And we usually have these battery-powered floodlights on stands we use so the customers can see us, and light up safety vests. On one particular night, we were behind by 20 or so minutes. Instead of leaving the depot at sunset, we were leaving at dusk. I was stationed at the high bridge. By the time we reached the bridge, it was pitch black aside from the stars providing a little light. My coworkers dropped me off and waited with me until the first customer arrived. I gave the little speech to that first cart of 4. I chatted with them a little bit. I was trying to buy some time and wait for the next customer cart, so there wasn't a massive gap for my coworkers, who have to flip the bikes around. After a few minutes I let these customers leave, and I was alone. I was alone for 20 minutes. I used the radio so many times, but it was static for everybody. One of the only times we've ever had an issue like that as well. I kept seeing movement in the tree line. I kept hearing fast footsteps all around me in every direction. I had the floodlight on above my head, so everyone and everything could see me, but I couldn't see shit. I turned off the floodlight and used my personal flashlight. I kept seeing quick glimpses of pale skin moving quickly, but right when I started seeing stuff I could hear the next customer cart coming close. So I turned the light back on and waited for them to come around the corner. When they pulled up I noticed they had a little boy with them, and he's scared of the dark. I'm terrified at this point but have to act appropriate, even more so because of this boy. I do not want to scare him. As I'm finishing my speech I hear movement right behind me and say Jesus fucking Christ and spin round with my flashlight on instinct. Poor kid. I told them it was probably just a deer, and they are good to go across the bridge. That same night the person stationed at the intersection. This isn't like an in-town intersection, it's very rural. It's right next to a massive cornfield. He's Native American and was very in tune with his culture. He told me privately a few weeks later that he heard rustling in the cornfield, and whatever was out there was whispering his name and trying to get him into the field. He was also without communication for those 20 minutes. But he wasn't in the woods and could see a lot better than me. Another time, me and that same coworker were headed back on the front cart. We were away ahead so we stopped the cart in the middle of the high bridge. It sounds scary. I am a bit afraid of heights and this bridge has massive gaps between the planks you could fit through. But after doing it so often you get used to it. It was a clear night and we were watching the stars and having small talk. Then it goes silent. We are 100 and so feet in the air above the woods. We can hear for miles. The dogs barking across the river 2 miles can be heard without even seeing the houses. We hear what sounds like a human mimicking a monkey noise, and we hear growling. He looks at me completely seriously and tells me in a stern tone that we need to get out of here right now. I drive TF out of there, and he moves states to Nevada shortly after this. A few other things happened here and there and to coworkers as well. Each of my coworkers have at least one story. I'm only sharing mine in this post. Otherwise it'd be too long. A few months go by and it's late fall, around the middle of November. I drive through that park in town a lot when I just want to go for a drive. I had my dog Fenrir with me and it's around 2 a.m. I can't sleep so I'm listening to a Melvin CD and driving leisurely through the park. As soon as I get past the entrance gates, I feel really uneasy and weird. I'm not easily scared. Going to that park at night makes me feel a primal fear. It's beyond fight or flight. I have never felt that way in my life anywhere else, ever. And I feel it every time I'm there. I'm driving through the park and I've rolled the windows up a lot more. Fenrir can still poke his head out but can't leap out. As I go deeper into the woods I feel worse and worse. I decided not to turn around because I'm already past the halfway point. Turning around would make me stay in the woods longer. I started speeding where there weren't turns I couldn't see around. I round the last corner and what I saw made me have nightmares for months. There was a pale, skinny, humanoid, tall and lanky, not quite human, fucking crawling on its hands and feet. But it was crawling fast as fuck, 20 miles per hour type shit. We don't have bears here. The only animal that size are large humans and deer. That wasn't a deer. It went from my right, crossed the street, and went into the tree line. Fenrir saw it too. He doesn't bark at animals, not even other dogs. He went ballistic. He was trying to force himself out of the small gap in the window, nearly foaming at the mouth and snarling. He never, ever acts like that. I'm a certified dog trainer and I've raised him from birth. Most recently, I've become obsessed with this park. I've walked there at night from my camper to the park with Fenrir. I'll never do it again. I didn't see a figure this time, as I was entering the park. A massive owl flew by my head so close I could have smacked it mid-flight. This made me feel weird for some reason. As soon as I get into the park I feel extremely weird, anxious, and nauseous. I walk a few hundred yards to the only streetlight in the entire park, and I turn around and face the woods. Me and Fenrir stand there, frozen, for like 10 minutes. The silence was deafening. Any time I heard anything, I'd jump. Finn was anxious as hell too. He kept staring into a certain spot in the woods a ways off. I swear I saw eyes in there every once in a while. I built up the courage to walk out and I haven't gone back since. It'll be interesting to see what happens at my job this year. I wanted to add that the county I live in is packed full of abandoned mines. Hundreds of them,